Hello, welcome. Almost everyone I've been talking to recently has been talking about the mental intensity, the mental chaos and pressure that they've been feeling recently. This Mercury retrograde in Pisces is already doing its thing. My theme today that I want to explore is actually inspired by the Sabian symbol for where Mercury stations retrograde, which is 23 degrees of Pisces. Well, he stations retrograde at 22 degrees, but we round up with a Sabian symbol. And this is a exploration of possibility and potential. Seneca wrote a lot about this. He has a lot of writing on the shortness of life, but his thesis is actually that life is not short, it's just that we waste much of it. And it's not because we're lazy or bad, we are distracted. We spend most of our lives being masterful at doing things that don't really matter to us, right? Things that get in the way of what we really want in life. So, in a lot of ways, this is not a failure of ability, but a lack of presence in our world. And I think it's interesting to note that even in Seneca's time, it was clear that people were distracted. So, imagining that we are bombarded with information, we have a little computer in our hands at all times, how much worse has it gotten? Sometimes we delay our own potential because of smallness, because of over responsibility to other people's versions of who we are. And Mercury retrograde is really pulling up something specific in Pisces, which is not your failures, but your delays in your potential. The times in which you felt a higher calling, but you turned away anyways. Not to blame yourself, but to see the pattern that is trying to come through. Mercury in retrograde is already moving our attention from attention to awareness. Mercury is really about being present. Well, I would say Mercury is about being perceptive. And so it likes to notice details and facts and, logic. When it when he goes retrograde, it almost invokes that right brain, which is where Pisces lives. So this is like doubly Pisces energy. Mercury is debilitated here, right? Because Pisces is not about facts, it's not about logic, it's not about details. And our awareness, our attention is being shifted into awareness, more holistic understanding of things, kind of stepping back and noticing things rather than trying to get to the answer, which is what Mercury likes to do, which is why it rules Virgo and Gemini and is exalted in Virgo. Now, I feel like the Mercury retrogrades over the last year and a half since mid 2024 have been particularly intense because the South Node is currently sitting in a Mercury ruled sign. So every time Mercury goes retrograde, every time he's debilitated, it's kind of pulling on us in an uncomfortable way to release our Virgoan tendencies of being overly responsible, being overly analytical and critical, choosing service to others over service to our own creative self expression. These are things that we are being asked to rethink, right? Retrogrades remind us to review, refine, rethink, recalibrate. All of the rewords, redo. Did I say that already? Notice when the mind is doing this thing where it's trying to do that Virgoan thing of trying to analyze, because Mercury in Pisces is here to be felt, not understood. This is why I often say I love this placement, because it makes such great poets and artists, because it really allows you or forces you to have to let go of logic. Now, we're going to read a little bit about the Sabian symbol because I think that's super important, and also briefly talk about the gene key that this is happening in as well, because that also adds a layer. So Pisces 23, the keyword here is sensitivity. The theme is strange things happening. This symbol speaks to the materialization of a higher reality, or the ability of man to tap into a potential that he can make manifest according to his particular will and desire. This emphasizes the power of the mind and the importance of focus and mental discipline. The challenge in this degree is on learning how to break through the conditioning effects of experience and develop a greater sensitivity to the possibilities of what can yet be achieved. So, just that sentence is really beautiful. The challenge is on breaking through the conditioning effects of experience. I often talk about with nervous system work that there are things like our nervous system does not learn through language. So like just telling ourselves that you are safe is not going to work. The body lives through experience. The nervous system needs to have a felt experience of safety doing something new in order to say, "Oh, that counts. I feel safe doing that." So a lot of our conditioning happens through experience, right? The experience of not doing what we wanted to do, the experience of not feeling safe expressing ourselves. And it's asking us to develop a greater sensitivity to the possibilities of what can yet be achieved. The key is not in allowing the self to become distracted by the allure of every passing whim and fancy or trivial problems of everyday living. Your greatest advantage lies in understanding the greater significance being revealed to you when things don't go as planned or when patterns and habits are suddenly broken. Be sensitive to opportunities created by change and confusion. Guard against creating your own chaos by refusing to discipline yourself or establish order in your life. Learn to sit still and listen. This idea of exploring where you delay your potential is for you to understand that you now have a different choice in this present moment. I understand, just like anyone else that's trying their best out there in this world, that it doesn't always feel logical. But Mercury retrograde in Pisces is asking you to think beyond logic. The possibilities that can happen when we allow the divine to work through us. The gene key that this happens in, it's very like close to moving into a different gene key, but it's in gene key 22, which goes from the gene key, or I'm sorry, the shadow of dishonor to the gift of graciousness. And the gift of graciousness comes alive when we can allow our emotions to simply exist as they are. And this gate produces some of the most brilliant artists because they know how to emotionally move people. So, once again, this idea that we are being asked to, this Piscean gift of being felt, not understood, and allow graciousness and receiving to become the way of this like divine intervention that allows us to take one step towards our potential. One of the things that I think is beautiful about this nodal axis that we currently have, where we're going to have a lunar eclipse on March 3rd in Virgo, South Node in Virgo, North Node in Pisces. The South Node is not saying Virgo bad, Pisces good. It's saying embracing the higher calling of Pisces and releasing the negative aspects of Virgo. But one of the things I love about this axis is that Pisces often can fantasize about these beautiful possibilities but really struggles in bringing them into reality. I can't remember who said it, but there was somebody who said something like, in order to every great idea, oh my God, I always do this. I always have like really great quotes, and then I'm like, what did they say? But in order to make an idea into form, you essentially have to kill it. Because when it lives in your imagination with the ultimate potential, it's beautiful. And when you bring it down into the material world, it's never quite as appealing. That's why we like to stay in the fantasy, right? This is Pisces. But what I love about Virgo is Virgo reminds us that these experiences, these transformations of bringing our manifest possibilities into reality start with a simple step, a daily routine, a commitment to some sort of structure or discipline that will take you just an inch closer every day to this possibility that you want to move toward. You know, I am a very service oriented person. I have in my entire life, but for a while, I really felt like that was a curse, and I always felt like people were using me for my service, right? And it wasn't until I realized that I actually really enjoy being of service. That's not the problem. The problem was that I had a really hard time putting up boundaries. And so service felt difficult because I merged with the other person in a way that didn't feel comfortable, in a way that felt like I lost myself. And I think a lot of us, like, boundaries are such an interesting thing. They're so nuanced because we can place verbal boundaries, but energetically feel completely entangled. And as humans, we're such energetic beings, you know, and when people place these boundaries verbally, but not energetically, we can feel that, you know? And I think a lot of us don't try to trample other people's boundaries on purpose. It's just like a certain energetic allowance. And so when I started really doing the work of noticing like who I am versus the other person, and I'm still in that work, right? Like I'm always working on my boundaries and energetically like allowing myself to feel that. I started noticing how much I actually love being of service again. But when we are overly responsible and trying to be manageable and palatable for everybody around us, we lose ourselves. And somewhere in that trade, our creative selves go underground and then we don't know who we are. But the thing is that creative self is not dead, it's just buried. And a lot of this work of sitting still, learning to listen, sitting with the body, coming back to the breath, you know, noticing those pattern that's going crazy, and then just, oh, there I go again. Let me just breathe into this. Where are my feet? Where am I right now? This is how we allow our nervous system to have a felt experience of safety. Your greatest act of service and contribution is to be yourself. Is to offer the world your creative, unique self expression. That creative, specific urge that keeps calling to you, it's there for a reason. And it wants to bring you indulgence. It wants to, well, it wants to bring you, yeah, indulgence. Let's not make that a bad word. And so for some of us, it may be going back into our memories to see where we started delaying our own potential, that quiet self-sabotage, and allow ourselves during Mercury retrograde not to search and seek for the answers, but to allow ourselves to receive them as we reflect. And notice that when we have a sense of defensiveness come up against these beliefs, that's okay. These patterns have been protecting us for a really long time. And to not try to do it perfectly, but to allow ourselves to just balance our day-to-day reality and maybe carve out a few minutes for ourselves, for our self-expression, to fulfill some level of our potential, you know? To allow our emotions to be there, but not to control us, to create structure. There was just a big pile of tarot cards here, so I'm just I'm just using them here, allowing our potentials to manifest, creating the causes and conditions in which they can become a reality for us. One of the things that I love about this is like, this is where I feel like a lot of us may be feeling right now, some pain. I know that this is like, in some ways to me, this whole idea is like quite devastating as a 12th house person myself. But I think it's really important for us to be able to look at this, right? To explore possibilities and maybe even make it fun again rather than pressure. The circumstances will never be perfect. And what choice will you make in the circumstances that you have now? Joy, no matter where you are, success, pleasure. Can you find one thing right now that feels good to you? Maybe even a pleasing sensation in your body. This is a Piscean gift to remind yourself that no matter how painful, everything that has happened to you is exactly what needed to happen to you to get you here. Your life is not a consolation prize. It never has been. These are the specific curriculum. This is a specific curriculum that your soul required to get you to be right here in this moment right now. The detours were not wasted. They were required. Where does Pisces fall in your chart? Where does Virgo fall? You know, with Mercury retrogrades, the Virgo and Gemini parts of our chart tend to be very affected, but specifically the Virgo right now. The intensity is trying to get you to release an old pattern that is not serving you anymore, and that will be ramping up until the eclipse. You don't need to burn your whole life down and start over, even if it feels like that. You don't need to push into something, into a communication. Like everything feels so urgent right now. We can start small. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.